Welcome to the World Leisure Pathways, Past, Present, and Future Conversations podcast series. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our listeners worldwide, and welcome again to the World Leisure Pathways, Past, Present, and Future Conversations podcast series, created by the World Leisure Organization in the framework of its 70th anniversary. My name is Cristina Ortega. I am the WLO Chief Operating Officer, and at today's episode, we will be building bridges between three different continents to discuss about the late trends and challenges on contemporary leisure research. At the first guest, we are very happy to have World Leisure Board member Professor Mary from University of the Western Cape in South Africa. She is the chair of the World Leisure Research and Knowledge Transfer Committee, conducts research and supervision in the field of sport and recreation, and is involved in different interdepartmental and interinstitutional projects nationally and internationally. She further provides training to recreational workers in the city of Cape Town as part of a collaborating agreement with 4 universities and institutions in the Western Cape and the city for the development of community-based recreational programs. We will also have with us today World Leisure Board member Professor Dr. Marcel Bastiaansen from Breda University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands, where he teaches courses on the psychology of leisure and tourism and on experience research and measurement. He is the founder and director of Breda University's Experience Lab, which conducts both fundamental and applied research on the role of emotions in leisure and tourism experiences and how these relate to well-being and quality of life. In addition to traditional research techniques, the Experience Lab uses psychophysiological and neuroscience techniques to study leisure and tourism experiences. And since 2021, Marcel is a full professor in leisure and tourism experience, affiliated with the Cognitive Neuropsychology Department at Tilburg University. Finally, we will travel across the Atlantic Ocean to visit Dr. Ricardo Uvinha, full professor and dean at the School of Arts, Sciences and Humanities at University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. Chair of the Scientific Committee of the World Leisure Congress 2018 in Sao Paulo, he is currently leader of the interdisciplinary group of leisure studies, coordinator of the World Leisure Center of Excellence at University of Sao Paulo, and regional editor of the Leisure Studies Journal. Recipient of the University of Sao Paulo Outstanding Teaching Award, he is an author of several articles and books about leisure, in particular with the South America region. And now I will give the floor to Professor Mary to start with this highly demanded conversation. Looking forward to listening to you.
Good afternoon or good day, colleagues. I'm very grateful to be with my esteemed colleagues from Brazil and from Netherlands. Welcome, Ricardo and Marcel. Today we're going to speak to you about research and how research in leisure from the past to present is being affected. The first question we want to ask is, in your opinion and in your own regions, in which direction are the contemporary leisure research trends going? Is there any change or transformation that may be noteworthy recently in your countries or in your regions?
That's an interesting question to ask. I think there's a lot of developments that have been going on in the past, let's say, decade in leisure research that are clearly moving to one direction. And of course, one of the, let's say, world events that has struck us is the COVID pandemic, right? Which, if anything, has made perfectly clear to the entire world the importance of leisure, because for a large part in people's lives, especially in Western societies, people have been very clearly affected in their leisure behavior and in their choice of leisure behavior during the pandemic, with the lockdowns and with the reduction in leisure opportunities that came with that. And what we've seen also is that as a result of this clear reduction in leisure choices, people have suffered in terms of a severe loss of experienced well-being. And that joins in with a trend that I've been seeing for a longer time, that leisure research is less and less about how can we help the industry make for better leisure experiences, towards a more societal orientation, like how can we use leisure to promote well-being amongst people. In that sense, the COVID pandemic was a very clear exponent of that, making very clear that leisure really, for a large part, determines well-being in people.
Oh, thank you for this invitation. Talking about my own region, for leisure, we say lazer in our language. I should remind you that we are in South America, and only in Brazil we speak Portuguese. The other countries in this region speak Spanish, and they usually say ocio or recreación for leisure. Considering the close connection with other aspects of human life, we can understand leisure as a culture living in a broader sense, practiced or enjoyed in the free time. However, in my view, the contemporary leisure research should recognize the main barriers, physical, socioeconomic, and symbolic, that still exists and prevents the access of all people to leisure, as well as the need for overcoming and confronting each of them. Another important change that might be noteworthy is the fact that leisure research has been emerging frequently from developed countries and the global north. The voices from the global south have not always been heard and do not feature often enough in the international literature in leisure studies.
Thank you. Yes, I would also like to reflect on what it looks like in South Africa, bearing in mind that in South Africa we have 11 official languages, which Afrikaans, English, and about 9 different Black African languages are being spoken. In many of these Black African languages, the word leisure does not exist. And for most of people, we speak about recreation rather than leisure. And for people in South Africa, if you speak about recreation, they immediately relate it to sports, being a sports-loving country. However, if we look at what's happening in South Africa, yes, we have been struck by the COVID pandemic, which did initiate a lot of questions on how do we present leisure activities in times of such pandemics. But in general, we struggle with a lot of social issues, and as such, service delivery through public sector is being investigated quite extensively. How can they provide better services to the communities in South Africa? There's also a huge focus on youth and youth at risk and persons with disabilities as vulnerable groups. We also have the risk of water safety in South Africa, in that many of our children cannot swim in South Africa, and we have a lot of drowning as a result. So outdoor recreation and water-based recreation, safe water-based recreation is being questioned. How can they provide swim activities or water-based activities in a safe manner to our children in South Africa? Therapeutic recreation as a health profession is gaining interest, and along with that, and I think it captures on what Marcel said about the COVID pandemic, is the question about how do you use leisure to promote health. That's quite a topic in South Africa. And that leads us to our next question. Could you provide an example of leisure as a means for social transformation that has particularly get your attention? Do you think that current leisure research trends cover this kind of psychological approaches? Do you miss any other perspectives that may require attention of researchers?
If I may kick off with this issue, I think it's a very important issue, because if we consider that leisure plays an important role in individual well-being, we should also look at the larger societal movements, right? So how does leisure affect more sociologically speaking, larger groups of people? And the trend that we see in Western societies, so like Europe and North America and Australia, is that there's an increasing divide between social groups. If you look at the Republicans and Democrats in the United States, it's a very good example of how groups are drifting further and further apart. And this is really fueled by the social encapsulation and the information bubbles that social media create. I think that's a societal trend that is dangerous to society as a whole. And leisure has the potential to serve as a platform that unites different social groups together, because people come together at the same time, at the same place, and with shared contents when they are engaging in leisure activities. So it is really a way of bringing people together, and we know from social psychology, for instance, if you look at intergroup contact theory, that if you bring people together and if people start communicating with each other, then that leads to an increase in mutual understanding and a reduction of social fragmentation and a better understanding across two otherwise divergent groups in society. So I would like to propose that we would more and more try to see how we can design for and organize leisure to serve as a platform or as a catalyst for improving the understanding between different groups in society, and so, as such, to promote social inclusion. I think that's an important future agenda for leisure practitioners and leisure researchers.
Well, thank you very much for this question. I think an important example of leisure as a means for social transformation is the fact that the Brazilian Constitution of 1988 declared leisure as a social right, a situation also assured in all state laws and municipal organs of Brazil. However, despite it being a social right, the number of Brazilians without access to a good experience in leisure environment is still significant. The main factors that exclude the lower classes from engaging in certain leisure practices are the lack of money, limited space, little state investment, and the mass culture industry advancement. In a country where most of the leisure attractions belong to private enterprises, families that have smaller budgets prioritize health, food, and education among other social spheres, leaving leisure in the background. The Quebec Declaration, entitled Leisure Essential to Community Development, published by the World Leisure Organization in 2008, highlights in its article first, the quality of life of groups and communities rests on common values of association, accessibility, diversity, safety, information, and freedom of speech. In this sense, leisure may have fundamental importance in people's lives, since effective participation depends on the knowledge of the different options that leisure can offer. Two perspectives that may require more attention of research, in my view. The first one is the significant change that can be seen in demographical issues, such as the increase in the elderly population in the country. Data from the Brazilian government suggests an increase of the elderly population as a result of the demographic transition process. The trend points out that in 2030, the proportion would be around 18.6%, and in 2060, 33.7% of the Brazilian population will be elderly. So we should pay attention to this challenge in the leisure field, in my opinion. And finally, the second perspective in the important change by use of the technology. Social media is quite famous in Brazil nowadays, especially the use of Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and WhatsApp. Also the use of metaverse and virtual reality. Therefore, this virtual behavior in leisure time should not be ignored by academic researchers. Thank you.
I would like to link up with what Marcel and Ricardo said. In South Africa, we also have the challenge of the provision of services, leisure services, to persons from poorer communities. And that is one of the major issues that we have to deal with in South Africa, in that about 79% of our municipalities are situated in rural areas or in areas where they cater for very poor communities. However, we still see that even though leisure is also a human right in South Africa, or seen as a human right, it still doesn't reach the people as it should. Globally, we also have seen a lot of social issues emerging, such as gender-based violence and racial discrimination, similar to what Marcel has reflected on. And I think definitely leisure has a place where it can serve as a catalyst to see how groups of people can learn from one another and get to know one another and respect one another. So there's many issues that needs to be addressed through leisure, and I think technology can play such a huge role in this whole process. Even if we reflect back on what happened with COVID, how many leisure activities has been promoted through technology, through Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and other platforms. And I think as a World Leisure Organization, maybe that is where we should focus on getting leisure out there to the people, even though they are from poorer communities. And we also need to reach out to our governments in the different countries and see how we can work together with governments and universities through technology and through service, through knowledge, to serve our communities globally, to provide leisure and recreation to people from all different walks of life and all different backgrounds. A last question is, in your opinion, as experts in the leisure research field, how could be the best way to connect universities and communities? If you don't mind, I would like to start by answering the question. In my opinion, the best way to link up universities and communities is to have compulsory community-based programs run through our universities and through our departments at universities, and to use those experiences as research opportunities. That is one of the major drives and niches at the university that I work with, is that we provide interprofessional and intercollaborative programs within our faculty that is promoting health to our community members, but by providing different services to them and use it as a platform to also conduct research. Although we have to be careful not to exploit our communities that way, but I do think it's a very good way where we can serve our communities as universities.
I think that's a very interesting thought, and the perspective that I have on that is let's say, starting from the reality of a researcher in the leisure field. The first thing that you always ask yourself if you want to initiate a certain study is, do I have funding for it? And what you see, at least in our country, in the Netherlands, is that research funding doesn't really come on a structural basis, but is more offered on a project basis. And what we've seen in that parallels the shift also from leisure industry to leisure at the service of society, is that funding has shifted for leisure research has shifted from industry-based funding to government-based funding. So local governments, regional governments, and national government that come with questions to us that address societal issues. So I would say by definition the research that gets initiated in this way from a bottom-up perspective, bottom-up initiative, ensures that the research questions that you are addressing in your research are societally relevant by definition, are about the people in the street, are about individual well-being, are about how to empower communities, and are about how to bring people together. In that sense, although it's often difficult as a leisure researcher that you're dependent on project money for shaping your research program, I think at the same time it forces you to adopt a societally relevant research agenda, and that's a good thing.
Well, in my opinion, the best way to connect university to communities is the fact that research centers and graduate programs should gain more strength with society in general, where the academic research necessarily find an echo in applicability in professional level and also palatable to common sense. It is noteworthy that Latin America has advanced considerably in leisure studies and its effort in articulating thematic research groups. I have acted as the chair of the Scientific Committee of the Leisure Congress in São Paulo in 2018. And this Congress gathered over 1,000 participants from 37 nations. I think an important legacy from this event was the new São Paulo Declaration. This document enforces leisure as a human right, in consonance with the 7th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it was published in 3 languages, English, Portuguese, and Spanish. Another important legacy was the Douglas Ribeiro da Silva International Field School, where 25 international students from 9 countries traveled to Peru's, an underprivileged community in São Paulo. Therefore, I defend that the World Leisure Center of Excellence Brazil should keep the promotion for more inclusion, regardless of the region of Brazil as a big country, or even promoting leisure in cooperation with thematic association across South America. Finally, I consider relevant to align leisure research to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. The SDG is linked to the United Nations 2030 agenda as new drivers for promoting sustainability among stakeholders in developing economies, comprising 17 goals with direct link to the promotion of leisure, such as good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, and reduced inequalities, among others. This document can provide the overarching framework as a recognition that in order to end inequalities, poverty, and deprivation, we need strategies to improve health, education, and spur economic growth while tackling climate change and promoting the natural environment. In reality, to end inequalities, poverty, and deprivation, we need to better understand what the issues in the global south are, how they manifest nowadays, but also how they have been developed historically. The publication of the agenda and the UN SDGs provide an opportunity to channel the efforts and tackling some of the key inequalities in the global south.
Thank you, colleagues. I think this was a very fruitful conversation. There's a lot of ideas and a lot of concepts that's been shared with us this today, and I think it's something that we need to take out there to our global communities and our global universities to see how we can connect research and communities with one another.